Hey there, it's Andrea, and welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast. Today I have with me A.M. Bobby Brumfield, who is the managing partner of Leonum Advisors, Corporate Protection Management, which is a full-service safety and security consulting firm that focuses on building strong security culture. He is the co-founder of the Men Against Domestic Violence Action Coalition, which has the mission to end violence against women and girls. Bobby is a former Omaha police detective, FBI Safe Streets Task Force member, and U.S. Marine. He has guest lectured on human trafficking in supply chains for the past several years at the University of Omaha, Nebraska at Omaha. He serves on several area boards, including Greater Omaha Chamber of Commerce, the Coalition on Human Trafficking, Bike Union Mentoring, and Inclusive Communities. Bobby, you are a busy guy.
Yeah, it's fun though. So
no, welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast. It's so good to have you.
Thank you for having me.
So, I mean, you are though. You're a mover and a shaker. You obviously are very purpose-driven, mission-driven. How far back does this desire to have an impact go for you? I mean, do you remember feeling that way as a kid, or like when did you really start like being motivated to be so impactful?
I think it did start as a kid. I tell people all the time. I kind of at like 9, I kind of laid out my pathway. I was gonna be a Marine, be a police officer, start a company, and be an astronaut. So the astronaut thing hadn't quite happened, but
yeah, it sounds like you could make that happen in the next few years. So if anybody's out there and wants to contribute to the send Bobby out to space, that would be amazing. So you have a lot of experience in law enforcement and security. So what are you doing now with security? What are you doing? What is your company doing with that?
So again, we're full service consultancy, everything from physical and cyber assessments, all the way through employee training, which is what I really enjoy. I really enjoy that part of it. Our focus is primarily, I shouldn't say primarily, but we really focus on building that security culture. We want, rather than just throwing up hardware and software, we want the people in your organizations to really care about each other. So a lot of times when we're talking, it sounds more like, we're employee engagement experts rather than security experts, but that works out, really well for organizations, because if their people care, that's where the security lies. It's not in your cameras and your watchdog systems. It's in people caring about each other.
Okay, so with all of your experience in law enforcement and security, what and then this emphasis on human connection, how has the last year and a half and the questions about policing and all that kind of stuff, I mean, how does that hit you? Like, what is your take on some of that? Like, what are the things that we should be really thinking about?
What's been going on with law enforcement is, it's unfortunate, but it's not surprising. Society evolves, and their way of wanting to be police evolves, or police rather. It involves, and police departments, law enforcement in general has to evolve with society. And I hear a lot of from the law enforcement side, I hear a lot of the, let's just keep it in status quo. Let's keep it, do as I say, don't question me, and unfortunately, this is coming from leadership in law enforcement, and that's just not how it is. We're here as society's call. It's not a police state. We don't get to dictate a lot of areas, and I'm not saying that we don't enforce laws, but we have, if society is changing, we need to adjust to that.
Hmm.
A lot of departments are getting it. A lot of leadership is getting it. A lot of the confrontational tone between law enforcement and communities has died down, and is dying down, and it's been happening for a while. There's been some great chiefs of police that was doing this far before the riots started. You know, if you look at America, there's a ton of places where there were protests and there wasn't incidents between the rioters and the police and the citizens. So policing is evolving as it should. You know, we don't police like we did in 1800s and 1950s. Didn't police, like the 60s and the 60s to the 80s, and we're just in a new era. So um, I think overall we're gonna, society and law enforcement is gonna find that sweet spot again and move forward. So I'm not worried, but again, I wasn't surprised that there was going to be this conflict. What happened to George Floyd was a kind of a wake up call for a lot of people on both sides of the issue. So I think we're going to move forward in a stronger place.
I I think that's a really interesting the idea of evolving with society, that our systems have to evolve as society changes. And it sounds like, I mean, some of the things that you really talk about in your TED talk, you talk about in different areas, have to do with that human connection. Do you mind? I listened to your TED talk and I actually typed out some of what you said, especially at the beginning. And I think it's basically your thesis. Do you mind if I share
Yeah,
that?
yeah, definitely. You know what? I hate that TED talk. That was my ego because I was told a million times. I speak a lot, so
Yeah, yeah.
so so I'm thinking, this is nothing. I can do this, and then the day of the TED talk is scripted, and everything that I had memorized just went out of my head, so I had to ad lib it. So my big moment on the stage, I blew it.
Okay. So I totally get that. I just side note, I've been there and done that. So you got all kinds of empathy for me. But but your thesis, I think, is really important for us to look at. And I would like to break it down if you don't mind. So I'm gonna share the you can tell me if I wrote it down wrong, but this is what I heard. True security occurs when we can create a space when each of our cultures can connect as equals and build out from there. It's hard because all sides have to admit our own faults, and even worse, our own vulnerabilities. So as our cultures become more connected, we as individuals are becoming less connected, and that is the biggest security threat of our time. First of all, I mean, there's a lot here. So can we break it down a little bit? My first question. Each of our cultures, when you're saying cultures, each of our cultures need to connect as equals. What cultures are you referring to?
Well, whether it's at the neighborhood level or a country level or international level, we have cultures, and I think you know I think that's the beauty of being humans is we all have different cultures, we all have different ways we look at it, and I'm factoring in religion, I'm factoring in food, I'm factoring in all our social differences, and regardless of whether it's we're looking at a neighborhood, we have to be willing to meet our neighbors, to a certain point. And again, we can factor in what's right and wrong, evil versus good. We can factor that in, but for the most part, people are just trying to make it day by day, and they want to be free to be who they are, and we have to respect that and build on it rather than resist it. So so culture is very, it's broad, and uh, I would really hate to just break it down to black or white and Hispanic and all, because within all of those groups there's different cultures. And
Absolutely.
again, that's the beauty of it all. Let's figure out how we can, you know, make coexist.
It sounds a little bit like just people that are different than me. When I don't feel super comfortable, there are certain people in our lives, and it's not very many usually, that we just feel completely comfortable with. And
Yeah.
that's great because we can connect on a level of comfort and similarity. But there are so many people, most people are just different than us in different ways. And so, so just getting outside of ourselves, it sounds like, is partly what you're saying, like being able to connect with somebody that's different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's, you have to be intentional about it. There are people that we're just naturally comfortable around, and most of the time those are the people that think and eat and look like us. But when you are intentional about, I'm going to learn more about this group over here today, it's amazing how much you find out. First of all, you find out you have a ton in common. And
Hmm.
then secondly, you find out I really enjoy these differences.
Hmm.
I enjoy this food. I enjoy this music. I enjoyed it, it just opens up so much, across the board, and I think we rob ourselves by not being intentional and getting to know other cultures and bringing them in. So
We're both from Nebraska, and sometimes I'm in the middle of Nebraska, so it's even more kind of sameness around me. But I think sometimes I can easily go to that place of thinking that I don't have a lot of cultural diversity around me. And so I don't have to work very hard at it because that's just not right here. If I want to find cultural diversity, I'm going to need to go someplace else. And then I'm more intentional. Although, I mean, the way that we're talking about it right now, in terms of just people that are different, I mean, there are plenty of people here, right in my own hometown, that look like me, talk like me, act like me in a lot of ways, that are still very different.
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And we need to take advantage of that rather than resist it. Let's and we may learn some things from them that can better our lives. And
Yeah.
and I think that's a key piece. Well, I'm not the type that I hate going to other countries on vacation and stand on a resort around a bunch of other Americans. It's like, why are we here? Yeah, the ocean and all that. We can go to Cali for that. Let's get out and actually learn something new, and that's important, and that's, to me, that's why we're here. To live and learn and help each other grow. So,
Grow,
and
stretch.
yeah, and the only way you're going to do that is actually being intentional about getting to know other people.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, so yeah, so there's like the whole thing, we can do it in our own backyard. But then also, like you're saying, there's also very different cultures around the world that if we don't stretch ourselves to be able to engage in something that is really different, we're losing we're losing something. And I was talking to somebody else the other day who was saying he travels globally for his work, and he said he's concerned because of the isolation that we've been in, that with less travel, that there's less empathy being built
Mhm.
between cultures and things like that. What are your thoughts?
I agree. We're at risk of othering, and when everyone is othering, there's just absolutely no way you can move forward. There No one, I don't want to get too political, but I'm not into nationalism where, I love America, I think this is the greatest place on earth, but I also think it's the greatest place on earth is because we have brought in other cultures and we figured out how to make it work. And I think it's important that we keep that. And COVID shut down the world, and then just political differences alienated tons of people, and that's just not who we are. Um, from an American standpoint, but I honestly believe that it hurts us across it. We can look at business. There's people that are saying, "Oh, well, America first," when it comes to businesses, and some of our greatest innovations have come from immigrants. So if we were to close that door and take a othering standpoint, there is no innovation. We would stagnate and die. So I agree 100% that we're at risk of that, and I would like to see that turn around.
I think that you bring up a really important point, that any kind of creativity is really about pulling from different ideas to create a new concoction of the ideas. And if you're only drawing on the same ideas all the time, if you're only drawing on the same experiences all the time, how are you going to make anything new?
Yeah,
Yeah.
And I think what's hindering it is that we've built these major organizations that are just super rich, and they've been able to keep going, with that same mindset, with an old, status quo type mindset, but they're burning resources that they saved from innovation that was, that they acquired these resources when they were innovative 50 years ago. And now you're stagnating and you're thinking you're surviving when all you're really doing is burning your resources, and eventually you're going to run out. And these newer companies are going to take off, and they're going to continue, and you're going to be gone.
Yeah.
There's how many Fortune 500s from the 18 and early 1900s that no one even knows about anymore because
They didn't innovate.
Yeah, they didn't innovate. Yeah, so I think that and again, I'm just talking from a business standpoint, but that's across the board. That's in society as a whole. We have to continually bring in fresh thought, new ideas, and the only way we're going to do that is being intentional about crossing cultures.
You say that one of the biggest obstacles to connecting as equals is that we have to admit our faults and our vulnerabilities. Why is this so necessary, and why is it hard to do?
Going back to that TED talk and how horrible I did in it, I had to admit I had to realize that ego is a big factor. You when you're successful for so long, you just take it for granted and you think you don't have to build on it. And I look at that as a whole, with just society as a whole, we all have our wins, and we always want to concentrate on the good, on how great we are. It's hard for us to look in the mirror and say, no, I have some serious flaws. The word privilege drives some people absolutely insane, because no, I struggled too. And you just can't have that conversation about privilege with them because yes, you struggled, but here's the differences, so I, I think that we do a really good job, even in leadership, we do a good job of patting ourselves on the back about the things that we're good at, but we're just horrible admitting that we have serious flaws. And if we can't admit that, how do you build on it? How do you correct them?
That is a great point, because what you're saying is that the only way to move beyond those flaws is to acknowledge them in the first place.
Absolutely.
And Yeah, it's like we are so afraid to be flawed that it hits at like the core of us, their identity. Like, I can't be flawed because then that means that I'm not worthy, or I'm not, going to be able to have the kind of impact I want to have, or whatever it might be. And so we just don't even want to see it. We don't want to see that.
No. And I look at COVID exposed that quite a bit.
Hmm.
You had a lot of, COVID to me was a wake up call, and we have to look at what our leadership models are, now. All the things that we considered great leadership in the past, is it time to revisit that? Because a lot of people that we thought were these outstanding leaders prior to COVID failed us across the board, in business and in society. They failed. They had absolutely no idea what to do next, and they did not want to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
They didn't want to ask for help. They just kept going down this path to, we see this brick wall in front of us, and we're going to hit it as hard as we can because we're not going to stop and ask directions.
Hmm.
And I think um, I think coming out of COVID, we really need to sit down and figure out what leadership is moving forward, because I think our motto is, flawed. I
Hmm.
think it's time for that to evolve.
Hmm. Okay. The way that you just talked about COVID and our response to leaders, or the leaders' response, made me also think of, so science has been admitting throughout this whole thing. It seems like science has been saying, or doctors have been saying, we're not totally sure, but we're pretty sure. And this is what we think now, but then like it changes in a few months because, research and whatever, and experience. And so things change. Um, but the distrust of the science, the distrust of the leaderships that is saying we're not totally sure, that is another problem.
Yeah.
So even though you can have leaders who are saying I'm not totally sure, there you can also have people who are saying, well, you're not totally sure, so I'm not going to trust anything. Like, I'm going to discredit anything else that you have to say about this whole thing.
Yeah. And that goes back to the whole, you know um, um, psychological safety
Mm.
and emotional intelligence. We're telling these leaders, hey, you have to be vulnerable. You have to admit that you don't know all the answers. But society has been, for the last 50 years, leadership has to be rock solid, and it has to be firm, and you have to say it, and that's it. Let's move forward. And now we're realizing that is just not the case. Things change, and science has always been that way. Science has never been exact. There's always
Mm-hmm.
been push and
Mm-hmm.
pull, and it's like we completely threw that out of the window because they're supposed. And I think fear has a lot to do with it as well. um, this is something none of us ever dealt with, as far as COVID. So I think fear is a major factor, and then you put in the political
Yeah.
fight that we've been going through. uh, but you're right that emotional intelligence that we're telling leaders they need to adopt has not really trickled down into society yet.
Into
And
the way that people can receive it.
yeah, absolutely. And so we have to do, those of us that's doing that work, we have to constantly be pushing it out there, not just in leadership trainings, but just in employee training and community training, just across the board. We really have to.
Hmm.
And again, we have to be intentional about it, and argue our case so that people really understand the direction that we're trying to go.
All right. So vulnerability in leadership. That sounds a lot to me like we could like almost, it connects to what you talk about when it comes to human connection. So it's pretty hard to connect with another human being when we think that they are kind of outside of the norm. They're not normal. They're not human. They're not like me. So I can't connect with them. Um, Talk to me about human connection and why it's so important when it comes to leadership. First of all, let's start there.
You know, people have to know that you see them, for who they are first. And we can pretend that's not the case as much as we want. But that person that graduated at the top of their class with the MBA is flattered when you say, you know, you you dress nice today. Or just something that's more on a human level versus that professional level. It's you have to recognize people for who they are. And I think back to my time in Afghanistan, when we would go out and talk to the tribal elders, and you would have conversations with them, and the most productive conversations is when you're just listening to how they started, their history, the history of the village, which is some pretty interesting conversations, and how they got to when you're not even talking about war, when you're not even talking, those are the conversations where people is like, all right, you know we can find some middle ground and build on it. And I don't think there's ever a situation when you have two people that are really committed to moving forward where they can't find um, common ground. If we're going at it just for me to get over on you, then there's going to be a problem always. But if we can find that ground where we can move forward, I I, I push this in the workplace. We have to figure out a way. You may like the brand differently, for a reason other than why I like the brand, but we both like the brand, so we're both going to take these steps to protect it.
Mm.
And I think that's what the only way you're going to get to those points is getting to know those people on an individual level, and it's hard because it's not hard, it's uncomfortable. And that's what leaders need to, they need to sit down and rethink. Um, am I cut for this? And if I am cut for it, what are the best ways to move forward with it? We simply cannot get anything done unless we're seeing each other as humans.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and I feel like I'm rambling because I have this conversation all the time, and I'm drilling it, and it's like, no, the rules and policies, and okay, that's great. How's that been working out for you? You know, no one cares about your policies because they don't care about the organization. And you know until you change that, that's just a piece of paper that you're holding over people's head while they're looking for another job because they're going to leave soon. And it's just the reality of it.
Mm. Yeah. So human connection is also vital to security because
This is going to sound awfully marinish, but hearts and hearts and minds. The heart. If you can win a heart, you can. You got the minds, and that's just what it boils down to. If I care about the person next to me, I'm going to do everything I can to protect that person. And if I care about these 5 people, I'm going to do everything I can for these 5 people and these 15 people, not a brand. I can put cameras all over your building, and all you're going to do is record workplace violence. Or I can come in and we can do some emerging leadership training. We can work on communication. We can work on emotional intelligence with your leaders and each other. And they're going to stop the workplace violence because when someone is having a hard day, it's going to be recognized, and we're going to take steps to figure out what we can do to make it better. um, you your camera is going to capture good rather than an active shooter.
Mm.
So I mean, we really have to focus on that point and work our way outward rather than the other way around, which is what we do too often.
So instead of feeling like you've got somebody looking over your shoulder, you feel like you've got people that are looking out for you, period.
Absolutely. You're not looking over my shoulder, you're right next to me.
Yep.
And you can still stay professional. I have leaders that say, that's touchy feely. How can you have emotional intelligence and still have a professional workplace? In their minds, it's like everyone's going to be in the hallway hugging and crying. And that's not what happens. People appreciate that you see them as a person, and they're
Yeah.
going to really, you know work hard to make that workspace better for others. Companies went through tough times over these last couple of years, and you can look at the companies where people were looking for a way out anyway, and they would, when the company was struggling, they was like, oh well, that's not my problem, I'm looking for something else, versus companies where people took pay cuts. They work longer hours or shorter hours, volunteer for furloughs just to keep everybody on board. There's all these great stories out there on where people pull together and actually helped each other get through because they cared about the organization and the people they were with. And we need to start telling those stories more because leaders will see it and maybe they'll start adopting some of that.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. Talk to me about how this applies at home. So you have this nonprofit. Tell me about the nonprofit.
So the Men Against Domestic Violence is our primary focus is educating young boys into ending violence, intimate partner violence. Um, the overall picture for me is ending violence against women and girls, and that's like my global view. But the Men Against Domestic Violence is really intimate partner, relationship. So um, we our we're thinking that if we can teach young men to safely stand up to domestic violence, sexual assault, bullying, all these things, early on, they're going to grow into men who are going to stand up to their peers and put an end to it. And I'm not saying fist fight when they see it, but they're going to check their peers when domestic violence is shown, whether it's date rape. Consent is a big deal. They're going to educate their peers on what consent is. uh, we really want to get that mind frame in them early on so that they grow up again into these men who are going to have these values already instilled in them. um, One of our executive board members and original founders he has a doctorate in childhood education. So he put our curriculum together and then we just built it up from there. So we talk about healthy versus unhealthy masculinity, learned behaviors, emotional maturity, what consent is, what it isn't, domestic violence 101, which is, it's not just physical, it's emotional, it's financial, it's all these different versions of it.
Mm.
Um, we and granted, we don't talk to fourth graders about that part of it.
Mm.
We'll talk to them more about the masculinity side, but as they grow and it becomes more appropriate, we'll start having deeper conversations. Um, Again, it's an all volunteer group, and what we do is we go out to places like the Women's Center for Advancement, which is our domestic violence center here in Omaha. uh, uh, just different groups around, and we learn, and then we'll take that information to our group, and then that group takes it out amongst their peers. So they're shared in their workplaces. If they're coaching, they're shared with their ball, teams, um, uh, and they're sharing it with their daughters, which
Mm.
is just as important. So it is, we're not a 501 or anything. We just gather information. from people who vet it, and then we share it with other men in hopes that they'll share it with young men.
Hmm. That's great. What does a young man need to hear to feel comfortable standing up to something that they don't feel, that seems wrong to them?
You know what? The first thing they need to hear is that they need to be empowered. And the way we do that is to let them know you're not the only one that see this as wrong.
There
You
you
know,
go.
even though everyone else is silent on it, or they may look like they're in agreement. If you know it's wrong, you have every right to stand up. You're not the only one. Um, and here are some ways you can voice your concerns in a safe way. Um, we have to empower more people to stand up, because whether it's music, television, we glamorize, and none of these companies will ever admit it, but we glamorize violence against women. We glamorize intimate partner violence. We glamorize violence in homes, and until we can until there's just as strong a movement against that, that can even it out, then we're always going to have these just astronomical numbers of violence against women and girls, and intimate partner relationships. Um, a lot of young men don't understand what they're watching on television is not right, because everybody is laughing and joking, and
Yeah.
and this is just the way it is. Um, and until you tell them otherwise, that's how they're going to go through life.
I had a conversation with someone else recently who we were talking about how tempting it is and how tempting it is to just sort of laugh along when you feel like you're also threatened.
Yeah,
Um, and that you have to really count the cost of standing up and saying something, because sometimes you are actually in, being threatened, and or something bad will happen to you or whatever, or you might, somebody might get angry or whatever.
mhm.
Um, so what does standing up in that kind of situation, or pushing back, what am I really asking? I'm saying it takes a lot of courage. I guess it
Yeah,
takes a lot of courage, and it takes a totally different mindset that you actually can make a difference,
yeah,
because it's not just it is the way it is. I can say something, and if I stop this in this moment, that it puts a pin in it or something. It makes it so that it doesn't just keep flowing
yeah.
like this.
So one of the things we do is, the big thing is awareness. So we make you aware of it. You know that there's an issue. It may not be safe for you to intervene, but
Yeah.
you can, get a plate number, report it. We want you to know that it's okay to do these things. You're not snitching, you're not soft, none of that. You are, and that's part of that emotional maturity and that healthy masculinity piece
Mhm.
of it. You're doing the right thing. Is being aggressive a bad thing? Not all the time. You can be aggressive on the football field, aggressive in your career, but that doesn't mean that it's cool to be aggressive in your relationship. So, like, if um, if one of the things that we talk to frats about is, you're going through this training. So right now, we want each of you to look at your peer and say, "Hey, look, I got you. If I see you getting out of hand, I'm gonna come and check you on it. If you see me getting out of hand, you're going to come and check me on it." And we're both agreeing right now that that's what we need to do. And when they go out to their other friends, they can just make that same pact. If I'm drinking, and consent is not registering, with me the
Mhm.
way that it should be, I need you to step in. I need you to be the friend, a true friend, and step in and pull me to the side. And so we have to keep pushing those conversations amongst men in general, and they can have those same conversations, whether it's at the workplace. If there's some harassment going on, you know, someone needs to stand up and say, this is not right.
Mm.
And the key to it is being empowered, feeling empowered, because, for young men in this society right now, they don't want to look soft. And 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 unfortunately, looking soft a lot of times is standing up for what's wrong.
Standing up for the vulnerable.
Yep, it's and it's unfortunate, but it's true, and we have to address it.
Was there a point at which you decided, okay, I got to do something about this?
Yeah. So this is gonna show like how stupid I was about it. So, I really didn't. So I saw unhealthy actions growing up, but I wasn't in a home where my dad beat my mom. They had arguments and shouting matches, but I never saw like fist fights or him calling out her out of her name. I didn't really see that up close and personal until I joined the police department, and where you actually walk in a house and see a woman that's just been beaten. Like, kids are watching, that's the first time I actually saw it up front. So I've always been. We started, me and my brothers. We started martial arts like when I was 8 years old, and my dad started us really young in martial arts. So in my mind, it was like, hey, I'm going to start teaching free women self defense courses, because if they can fight back, this will end. There won't be any more domestic violence. I knew nothing about power and control, um, any of that stuff, and at that time, law enforcement here wasn't really being educated on domestic violence like they are now. I'd never heard of a power and control wheel. To me, it was like either she's scared, she stays because she's scared, or it really ain't that big a deal to her, or it was like caveman thinking about it. Um, so I started off teaching the women self defense, and one of a domestic violence advocate came to a class, and after that class, she was like, "Hey, why don't you come to this meeting so we can talk to you more about what domestic violence actually looks like?" So I went to that meeting and bumped into another former police officer, and we were like, "Hey, you know what? We need to tell more men how this really works," and
Mm.
and that's how our organization started.
I really appreciate the fact that you, even at the beginning and when you were describing how you function, that you go to these places, learn from people who have been there, done that, experienced it. And then you take that information and you help disseminate it, you help spread the word. More than just, you obviously learned kind of the hard way or whatever, but you learned that just because you think you know what the answer is doesn't mean that you necessarily understand the full context. And so to go and be humble and ask and find out what the real context is, and then be able to take that forward, I think it just kind of goes back to what you were saying before with being able to look at each other as equals, because I think it's easy to come in as somebody who thinks that they have it figured out, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to figure that I'm going to change this.
American leadership.
American leadership. I've certainly been there, done that as well. So, yeah, but to be able to say, now, hold on a second, before I get too far down this road, I probably need to find out more and educate myself a little bit more about what's really going on. Look at these people as equals instead of looking at myself as somebody who has something to give them.
Yeah, yeah. And
Mm.
and and I think it's natural for us because we look at that, men have that savior complex a lot of times as well, where we know best. Let
Yep.
us come in, and you know, and I think back on, how many conversations I had like that when I was a police officer talking to a victim of domestic violence. And I'm like, hey, why don't you just pack your bags and go? Let's just go. And it just isn't that simple. And I'm really happy now. Law enforcement has come a long way, and they're getting the kind of training that they need, but there's still a long way to go. And if we put more of that out in society, these guys that join the police department are already going to know it when they join. So that's the goal that we have.
Okay, 2 more questions. First one being, where can people find you and your information?
So my email is ambrumfield@leonumco.com, and that's leonumco.com. I'm on LinkedIn under AM Bobby Brumfield. Phone number 402-706-0536. I mean, I'm really not a hard person to find. Unfortunately, because my daughter can find me way too easily when she's broke. So I gotta figure out a better way of hiding from her. But no, I'm not hard to find at all.
Oh, good. That's great. Okay. All right. Last question. What last piece of advice would you want to give somebody who really would like to have a voice of influence?
Step out on it, be intentional about it, be brave, and if they really want to have that influence, just go back and make sure that you have the knowledge that you need, even if it means sitting down and listening to someone else. But because we don't know everything, but the biggest thing is just being intentional and not waiting on an opportunity to come to you. Take that step out, be brave, and make that opportunity. So I think if we have more of that, we'll be in a much better place in the world.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for being a voice of influence, and for our listeners, for so many people.
Again, I appreciate you having me on.